When one's nearing the end of a life, as I am, my allotted span of 70 years and 10 already well past, hair white and disappearing, breath short, eyes dim, grunting, coughing, groaning, with many other intimations of mortality in flesh and mind and spirit, it's natural enough to be thinking about death, particularly here in this graveyard where my father lies buried, with a space beside him which I expect to be occupying quite soon now. Dust to dust, as the burial service in the Book of Common Prayer puts it. Or in my case, as I sometimes wonder, will the end be signalized by a celestial voice on high, proclaiming the single word, cut? From my earliest years, I've been much given to thinking about death. Some would think abnormally, or even morbidly. First as an infinitely remote and mysterious prospect. Then, as the years passed, as something, an actual happening, which must in due course befall me. And now, near at hand, so near that it quite cancels out all the plans and expectations and hopes relating to this world that have occupied my mind. As Dr. Johnson said of the man expecting to be hanged, the prospect of death wonderfully concentrates the mind. This might seem in contemporary terms a melancholy, if not unmentionable, case to be in. Death having replaced sex as the great taboo, the dirty little secret. I, on the contrary, find it very uplifting, like the close of a June day, a distillation, as it were, of everything most beautiful and most loving in what's gone before. A beginning, not an end. The darkness falling, and in the sky, the distant glow, the lights of Augustine's city of God. Looking towards them, I say over to myself John Donne's splendid words, "Death, thou shalt die." Here in the graveyard, the dust settles. There, in the city of God, eternity begins. Oh, that thou shouldst give dust a tongue to cry to thee. So writes George Herbert, a door of utterance for dust. Words that have a beginning and an end, addressed to what never began and can't end. Impossible. Yet the passion to speak persists, like seeing someone off in a train, and when the train begins to move, rushing along with it to get in one last word. After all, for more than half a century, I've been a communicator, what St. Augustine calls a vendor of words, and the habit remains. Words tapped out on a typewriter or teleprinter, shouted down a telephone, mouthed from a platform, scribbled by hand, spoken into a microphone, recorded on tape or video. Words, 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 millions and millions of them. Particles of spray momentarily caught in the sunlight, and then falling back in the ocean whence they came. Sonorous leading articles, trivial gossip paragraphs, pompous obituaries, news stories from our special correspondent here, there, and everywhere, exhortation, speculation, every variety of composition. A positive Niagara of words, frothing and churning on their tumultuous course. When I look back on my life nowadays, which I sometimes do, what strikes me most forcibly about it is that what seemed at the time most significant and seductive now seems the most absurd and futile. I mean, for instance, success in all its different guises, being known, being praised. Then pleasures, ostensible pleasures, like acquiring money, or seducing women, or traveling, going to and fro in the world and up and down in it, like Satan. Exploring and experiencing whatever Vanity Fair has on offer. In retrospect, all these exercises in self-gratification seem pure fantasy, what Pascal called licking the earth. Diversions designed to distract our attention from the true purpose of existing in this world, which is quite simply to look for God and find him, and having found him, to love him, thereby establishing a harmonious relationship with his purposes for his creation. On the other hand, I look back on experiences which at the time seemed particularly desolating and painful with particular satisfaction. Indeed, I can say with complete truthfulness that everything I've learned in my 75 years in this world that has truly enhanced and enlightened my existence has been through affliction and not through happiness, whether pursued or attained. In other words, if it ever were to be possible to eliminate affliction from our earthly existence by means of some drug or other medical mumbo-jumbo, as Aldous Huxley envisages in Brave New World, the result would not be to make life delectable, but to make it too banal and trivial to be endurable. This, of course, is what the cross signifies. And it's the cross, more than anything else, that has called me inexorably to Christ.
Such is faith, springing up out of the immortal seed of love, and ever budding forth in new blossoms and maturing new fruit, existing indeed in feelings, but passing on into acts, into victories of whatever kind over self, being the power of the will over the whole soul for Christ's sake, constraining the reason to accept mysteries, the heart to acquiesce in suffering, the hand to work, the feet to run, the voice to bear witness, as the case may be. These acts we sometimes call labours, sometimes endurances, sometimes confessions, sometimes devotions, sometimes services. But they are all instances of self-command arising from faith, seeing the invisible world, and love choosing it.
It's often said that old age is a sort of second childhood, and it's true in a way. One does go back to childhood, I find. For instance, I remember things that happened when I was a child much more clearly and vividly than things that happened more recently. More often than not, yesterday is totally obliterated. But I can recall exactly happenings as long as 50 or 60 years ago. It's the same with places. I mean natural scenes like this. It's a lovely field with sheep and the orchard and the sky. It's, again, like a child's reaction, as though one was seeing it for the first time, although in fact it's a place I come to almost every day. the reaction is sharp, like a child's reaction. And then with people too. Everyone, as with a child, is a sort of relation, all uncles and aunts, brothers and sisters, belonging to one family, and so to be trusted, to be loved, to be confided in. So when people see this second childhood as an intimation of senescence, I don't agree. I'm more inclined to think of it as a conditioning process for eternity, as getting one used to the circumstances that one's going to move into. And furthermore, as bearing out those sayings of Jesus about how we have to be like a little child to understand his words and to enter his kingdom. There's another thing that happens to me nowadays quite often. It sounds rather strange, but actually is enormously delightful. And that is that I have a sense of being half in and half out of my body, as though it was almost a toss-up whether I went back and resumed my life or made off and left my battered old carcass behind me forever. And in that curious state, in a sort of limbo between time and eternity, there are two convictions that I have, two very strong convictions. The first is of the incredible beauty of our earth and of human beings. The colors and shapes and smells and sounds of the earth. And human love, the delight of human work, human procreation, the continuance of life from generation to generation. All these things seem absolutely wonderful and beautiful. And then the second impression, stronger than I can possibly convey, is that as an infinitesimal particle of life, I'm a participant in our Creator's purposes for his creation. And that those purposes are loving and not malign, creative and not destructive, universal and not particular. And in that feeling, in that conviction, a very great comfort and a very great joy. Of course, in such a state of mind, one looks back on one's life and all the worldly pursuits that it's involved with a sort of distaste, as though it was all worthless, wasted time. On the other hand, I must admit that the profession of journalism, which I've practiced for the last half century and more, has at any rate one very great advantage. And that is, it gives one a very sharp sense indeed of the sheer buffoonery of power and of those who seek it. Without a god, men have to be gods themselves and fabricate their own immortality. As here in wax, in Madame Tussauds exhibition, a place of images. In the beginning was the image, and the image became wax and dwelt among us, full of absurdity. Images of the famous and infamous dead, of the celebrated and notorious living, above all, of the gods and goddesses of the media. These images of images, programmed to speak and gesticulate in accordance with their preordained role. Even, come to that, an image of myself. From time to time, I've had a bizarre notion that I might change places with my image, spend a few quiet days here in Baker Street, and leave him to do the various things that I've got to do, to sit at my typewriter and grind out words, to hear the cry action and respond to it, and then relapse when he hears cut. Or again, when the Toastmasters prayed silence, then, Your Grace, Your Excellencies, my lords, ladies and gentlemen. I like very much a notion of Pascal's, that those in authority need to dress up in order to justify their eminence. If judges didn't wear ermine, Pascal says, who could possibly suppose that they were capable of dispensing true justice? In the same sort of way, priests in their vestments, scholars in their gowns, admirals in their gold braid, generals with their red tabs, kings and queens with their crowns and their orbs, and chefs with their tall white hats. In the same sort of way, clowns have to paint their faces in order that people may know they're being funny. In other words, authority requires an image. Men in relation to power become images. It's only in their relation to God that they dare to be men. Here they all are, the captains and the kings, the great ones that ebb and flow with the moon, all in wax, kings and queens, presidents and politicians, soldiers and sailors, pontiffs and ideologues, all waxworks with their names written on water, or what amounts to the same thing today, written on a television screen. All stars in an interminable soap opera called history. I've always had the feeling, from my very earliest memories, that somehow, somewhere, there was another dimension of reality where the fancy dress was put aside, the grease paint was washed off, the arc lamps were lowered. Even as a child, if I happened to catch a glimpse of a local mayor in his regalia, or a local vicar in his, it filled me with a kind of wonder, as it might be looking incredulously at a Father Christmas in a cotton wool beard. I feel as though all my life I've been looking for an alternative scene, for the flesh beneath the wax, for light beyond the arc lights, for time beyond the ticking of the clocks, for a vista reaching far beyond the furthest reach of mortal eyes, even when magnified to thousands of light years, for a destiny beyond history. How extraordinary that I should have found it, not in flying up to the sun like Icarus, but in God coming down to me in the Incarnation. A seeker after reality, which means God, is bound sooner or later to be drawn to the Sea of Galilee, the scene of the Incarnation, whereby God leant down to become a man, Jesus of Nazareth, in order that men might reach up and relate themselves to him, their Creator. Or in the sublime imagery of the fourth Gospel, whereby the Word became flesh to dwell among us, full of grace and truth. It's been my good fortune to come here on numerous occasions in the way of my profession of communicator. This is almost certainly the last time, so I survey the scene with particular intensity, trying to store it in my mind, as it might be studying a beloved face never to be seen again. Who can fail to be uplifted by it? Other shrines and places of pilgrimage are liable to be fabricated and are frequently vulgarized, but this one is somehow inviolate. These are veritably the hills Jesus saw when he lifted up his eyes. This is the sea which provided his first disciples with their livelihood as fishermen, and which he often crossed, at times to avoid being in King Herod's jurisdiction. The same winds blow as in his time. The sun rises and sets in the same places. In the surrounding countryside, many of his magical words were uttered, and the sick and the disabled gathered in the hope of benefiting from his healing hand. It was from here that he took the road to Jerusalem, there to fulfill his inescapable destiny, the crucifixion and the resurrection that followed. Let me then, as one more poor pilgrim who's found his way belatedly to Galilee, a true child of his time, with a skeptical mind and a sensual disposition, add my testimony to that of the millions upon millions of others during the last 20 centuries. I say then that the words Jesus spoke and the revelation he proclaimed were true when he spoke them, are true now, and will be true forever. Moreover, that those who care to heed them may find a release from the fantasy of power, which is the world, into the reality of love, which is the kingdom not of this world that Jesus proclaimed. Heaven and earth shall pass away, he said to his disciples, but my words shall not pass away. We have them still, our most precious heritage. Here and now, for those who care to live by and in them, while still living in our earthly city, they can prepare themselves for the citizenship of the city of God which lies before them. Likewise, the promises Jesus made are still valid and will continue so forever. Particularly his promise that he wouldn't disappear from the world after his death, but continue to be accessible to those who sought him. Lo, I am with you always, he said to his disciples, even to the end of the world. So it follows that in the afflictions of this world, no one need ever lack a comforter. In the hardships of this world, no one need ever lack a helper. In the stumblings and losing one's way, which are inevitable in this world, no one need ever lack an arm to lead on, a guide to show the way. Still, there's something else, something that's searching my heart. I find it very difficult to express in words. Accept the everlasting truth of Jesus' revelation. Accept the everlasting validity of the promises he made. Yet still, there's something else, an extraordinary illumination that comes flooding in on one's being. An extraordinary awareness of quite exceptional poignancy and force. A knowledge past knowing. A hope past hoping. Call it faith, which swallows up all the little intricacies of doubt and factual fidgeting. Call it being reborn, a new creature arising out of the grubbiness and dust of worldly living, like a butterfly out of its chrysalis. Whatever it may be called, it came to pass here in Galilee, a new dimension to our mortal existence, a new freedom, not for a tiny elite, not based on propositions and institutions, but burgeoning in each human heart and only needing to be allowed to grow.
Sing word in time.
After his baptism in the waters of the River Jordan by John the Baptist, our Lord made for the wilderness, probably this very one, lying between Jerusalem and Jericho. The Apostle Paul did the same thing after his Damascus Road experience. So have countless others, from hermits subsisting in remote and inaccessible caves, many such in this neighborhood, to troubled souls to be seen in the early morning walking in city parks and beside ornamental waters before the day's noises and movements have begun. What the wilderness offers is its emptiness and barrenness and silence, as here. Not a tree or a street, not a building, not a telegraph pole, not a road or a vehicle in sight. Nothing to suggest human habitation, apart from an occasional flock of skinny sheep and goats, or vultures flying through the sky. So in the wilderness, the world seems far away. No social life, no media, no occasion for bitterness or frustration. Just an arid haven of refuge, a dusty paradise. No votes to cast, women to seduce, money to accumulate, celebrity to acquire. All the habitual pursuits of the ego and the appetites suspended. I love it because when all these pursuits of mind and body have been shed, what remains is, insofar as this is attainable in our mortal condition, an unencumbered soul with no other concern than to look for God. And looking is finding, and finding, one may dare to hope, is keeping. This is what St. Francis of Assisi meant when he spoke of being naked on the naked earth. This is the most sublime state a human being can aspire to, being in the wilderness alone with God. From such an encounter with God, what emerges? That we are indeed made in his image, and that though fallen creatures and inheritors of Adam's curse, we yet may aspire to participate in his purposes. What they are, we know not. What they portend, we cannot imagine. Nevertheless, knowing God brings with it the requisite faith to surrender wholly to his purposes. Then at last we can pray, really meaning it, fully accepting its implications. That line in the Lord's Prayer, thy will be done, which is all there is to say to God, then or at any time. So, this wilderness is suddenly full of joy and hope. It does veritably blossom like a rose in the confident knowledge that nothing can befall us to our ultimate hurt other than to become separated from God. All other ills in this are transitory, and like clouds melting away in the sun's glow, come to be incorporated in the radiance of God's universal love. Nor need we belabor the skies with cries to him, since we have at hand a mediator in one who also came to this wilderness, the living Christ.